We have with us the Global Media Director, Reckitt Benckiser, none other than Andrea Bernhardt. So please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Andrea.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Hello. It's lovely to be here. Thank you guys for having me. Oh, perfect, thanks. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about media complexity today, and specifically in the lens of digital transformation. Part of the job I have at Reckitt is to really try to understand how we take all this new technology and make it a beneficial opportunity for our brands. So with that, let me talk a little bit about me and the company, right? So for those of you that don't know Reckitt Benckiser, I think most people probably in this room do. One of the leading FMCG companies around the world. We're in about 200 countries with 700 million households. Our portfolio of brands expand across health. You know, we have Durex, Scholl, Nurofen, hygiene, Dettol being one of the leading disinfectant products in India, and home, you know, Vanish and Airwick. Our products are in the lives of our consumers, and it's such an important part of making sure that we're connecting with our consumers in a meaningful way to ensure that we are having that connection and that conversation all the time. My role at RB is the global media director, and essentially what that means is I'm setting the vision. I have to think about what the future looks like in media. I have to, you know, break down the walls and understand the complexities and ensure that the tools and capabilities that all my local teams have are going to suit the needs for the brands into the future. So let's take a step back in time. 5 years ago, I would say, was pretty much the start of the quickness of this digital transformation. And I have to appreciate the digital transformation because it's enabled me in my work to do a lot of amazing things. But I also think that what it's created is tremendous complexity. You know, GRPs, that was an easy thing to calculate. That was an easy concept to understand, and that was a very simple way of planning media. You know, today's world, you now have multiple touch points, multiple placements, multiple types of technology like apps and web and desktop and mobile and all these things that you need to start asking more and more and more questions in order to really understand where do you even start. And the starting point can sometimes become the hardest piece, right? So if I had to just laundry list a couple of questions that I know I face on a daily basis is, who's my consumer now, right? So the millennial generations growing up and becoming a key consumer, their behaviors are tremendously different than the baby boomers before them, right? The idea of programmatic versus direct, you know, certain markets have much more ability to have the technology and the capabilities in programmatic, but programmatic is just a buying style. This is not going to go away. It's not a, oh, we're going to do programmatic or we're going to do direct. It's going to become all-encompassing because it's an automated buying style. You know, mobile versus desktop, you know, how much penetration should I have in mobile? And knowing that, you know, how do I get my data? Because data then becomes more complex to get. So all of these complexities start to make our lives a little harder. So all of these things, all of these new wave, and if I'm standing in front, sorry, all of these new wave, you know, technologies really have come of age in the last 5 years. The Internet of Things, you know, in 2008, the number of devices has matched the people in the world. By 2020, it's going to be 7 times the people of the world, around 50 billion people, or 50 million devices, I should say. Voice recognition. I remember when Siri came out, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I can ask her questions, and she'll answer back. Now, I don't know if I walk down the street, I like, all of my search queries are done through Siri, and I'm like, how did that happen? Like, that propensity, that quickness for change has just moved us so quickly through this digital transformation. If I were to poll all of you in this room, how many of you could actually tell me that you are an expert at all of these things? Anyone? That'd be really awesome, and I want to talk to you. All right, because the truth is, no one is an expert at all of these things. And that is okay, because we need experts in individual things. We need people to help us and guide us and educate us. And that is why we're here today. So let me just come back to my business for a second. I need to make meaningful connections with consumers. At the end of the day, that is what I'm trying to do, meaningful connections. Now, what I love about the digital transformation, it's allowed us to do these connections and achieve this goal in such a new way. And so if I had to say the one sentence of what I'm really trying to achieve in my business is fully trackable, end-to-end, right? Fully trackable, end-to-end, meaningful connections that allow us to drive sales, increase penetration, and have brand equity. Simple, right? But fully, trackable end-to-end. And that, to me, is the benefit of the digital transformation. We now have tools in place. I mean, they're not perfect, and they're still getting, more sophisticated. But we now have tools in place to start tracking a consumer from the time they see something to the time they make a purchase. Once we actually start breaking down all the walls out there, which is part of the challenge that we're up against as well. However, in order to do that, you need to think about our model. Years ago when I was on the agency side, we used to sell into the idea of clients is the 360 integrated planning cycle, and everyone needs to be fully surround sound in their channel planning. And it's still a great concept, don't get me wrong. And yes, you need to be surround sound in your channels. They are about campaigns. They are about multiple touch points. But today, it has to be about a 365 model, an always on with assets and experiences. These consumers have so much around them. There's so many messages and there's so much clutter. And to really understand how to communicate with them is having a relationship with them. And so, with this said, it's really important that you think about the full spectrum of how you know the consumer into how you reach the consumer and how you message to them. And again, the starting point is really the hardest bit. And so I'm kind of a simple-minded person. I like to break things down and tackle them in linear types of chunks. And there's four techniques, I think, that I use that hopefully I can help you, inspire you to your own businesses. The first one is about knowing your consumer. So right off the bat, don't do anything until you fully know who this consumer is. The consumer has changed. It is a new type of consumer. What motivates them? What are their behaviors? And how do they want to be communicated with? Then making sure you can reach the consumer. Do you have tools in place to really ensure that you don't have a wastage, right? I can easily put a television spot out there in the world. Is it really hitting all the housewives that I need it to, or is it hitting men 21? Very different type of strategy than television of the previous world. Then it's about the messaging. This is probably the hardest part because it's so individualized. Everybody wants and gets messaging in a different way. And so this piece, I would say, as I go through the individual bits about it, is really probably your most complicated bit, but also the one that's going to be the most compelling if you get it right. And lastly, and this is my favorite part to talk about, is your structure, your technology. And I think you guys are all here today to talk a lot about technology. This is the bit that I would say over the last 5 years I've had to get educated massively on, because it's just so important and so fundamental to have the right structures and right foundations in place to do this and to have the full end-to-end experience. So with that said, I'm going to dive into these little bits. So first and foremost, knowing your consumer. Again, I'm going to give you a snapshot of, well, first I'll talk about, this is 10 years ago in America, okay? This is a traditional American family watching television 10 years ago. This is how they watch television. This is how they consume media. The idea of devices were there, but it wasn't necessarily a place that you went to for content. The idea of more appointment watching, it was a passive medium, but it was something that they came together to do, and it was family time. And this was a way to spend time with the family. Now you fast forward to today, yeah, that's what's happening, okay? You could almost put the same family in there, they're a little bit older, but that'd be what's going on. They're all on their own device. So how can you possibly really understand how to message to all these people effectively, okay? Because the children are definitely going to be influencing their parents on purchases. The parents are the decision makers, but ultimately all of these people are coming together and they're all consuming content so differently. But more importantly, the younger ones, they're going to get older and they're going to become decision makers. And we have to get ahead of their trends and make sure from a future forward perspective, we understand what their habits are. I love the idea of the never unconnected piece of this, because I think I'm kind of like a device junkie. Like I like to have a lot of things and have devices as well. And I love technology. But this is also a massive challenge for brands because it really comes around this multi-touched, 24/7, lean-in type of consumer that because they're surrounded with content all the time, it's easy to shut off. And so the content that you put out into the industry has to be really relevant for them, has to build a relationship for them. And it can't necessarily be in your face, blatant advertising all the time. It doesn't work like that anymore. I heard a stat yesterday when I was with our India team around the fact that in India alone, there's going to be in 2020, 3 mobile smartphones to 1 TV in households. 3. So that reality of what I showed you coming from America is going to creep in, if not faster, because I know that this country is leapfrogging some of the technology that we already have in our countries. So the first thing we need to do here is think about the new consumer journey. So the idea of the consumer journey in previous world was extremely linear, right? Awareness through to loyalty, but you knew how to get through each of those phases, and you knew kind of how the consumer would behave through them. Today, it's a jumbled mess. It's a massive opportunity, but it's a jumbled mess. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. I think my biggest thing with the consumer journey is really trying to break it down and define the roles with which these channels now play in the consumer's life. And if you can say what type of role that is, then you can also then define what data you might need or what content strategy might be, or is it really a priority in really reaching this consumer, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't do all this well. It's just like being an expert on all things digital. You can't be everywhere. It's just unrealistic. So you have to make priorities. But the point is a lot of marketers tend to go to the advertising spectrum first. They don't think about organic. They don't think about the e-com story, and they definitely don't think about loyalty. And if we're not kind of closing the loop on the full journey, which is the opportunity within digital, then you will lose the consumer, and the idea of brand equity will be lost. And so we don't want to do that, right? The next thing is to think about how you're actually getting insights, right? So knowing the consumer journey is all about the insights with which you have. I am a big believer in moving from reported behavior, right, your panel data, and all that, focus groups, to actual behavior. Instead of doing, brand tracking surveys and go to Google Analytics, go to Google Trends. If you really want to understand the consumer and the day-to-day thinking, go to Facebook, and Facebook listening. There's so much out there and so many rich insights. And yes, it can be overwhelming, so you want to have the right structures in place to allow you to do this nimbly. But I think that if you actually move away, not fully, because you need some of the panels and the research, but move also to include this type of insight gathering into your daily routines, then it's going to have such a richness in who this new consumer actually is. The most important thing to me is that these consumers are individuals, you know. We can't always target them as individuals. It's not realistic to say I'm going to have individual advertising for everybody. But there are ways to think about these consumers as individuals. And I think that this is really the benefit of you know, technology and hyper-targeting and content personalization and where we are today. I will say that the way I consume content is massively different than someone in my family consuming content. And what they want to see, despite us having a similar age and you know, doing the same things in life, they want to see something completely different because what motivates them does not motivate me. What motivates me doesn't motivate you. And so motivation plays a massive role in this. You have to think about it on an individual spectrum. So once you've known the consumer, and we talked on the individual basis of getting to them, it's really about, okay, how do I get to them? How do I actually get to them? And you know, this word programmatic is always out there, and I personally love it because I've seen results and I've seen it working, but I think it can be daunting in the sense of, I know this market hasn't necessarily been as penetrated with it as it could be, but it is a way to have that individual connection, that one-to-one connection. And I call it one-to-one, but it's one-to-one at scale. And the way you do that, there's two things you need. Access to data and technology, right? So a lot of the reason we're all here today. And what that allows us to do is have more effective buys that have reach and relevance, but also individuality. And so the 5 things that I've really benefited from looking at these two things combined are the right person, right? Audience targeting or trigger targeting, making sure that I am reaching the person that I've just discovered, right? Cross-channel optimization. So how do I do, you know, the best advertising across all the devices that I have to now work across all the platforms I now have to work within? The right experience, and again, this goes back to that meaningful connection. Experiences are key for this consumer. They want the relationship with the brand. You can't be passive with them. The right content, so content personalization, you know, what I think that this is a technology that's starting to come up a little bit more, but it's not fully there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And attribution, again, this is something that I find to be massively important as an opportunity. It's not fully up to speed, and as tech, you know, people out there, it'd be great to start getting, you know, new innovations within this space to make it easier for us. So the last two here on content personalization and attribution, you know, this is a access to data and access to seamless data. And so what I mean by data, which I'll talk a little bit about in a couple minutes, is the idea of making sure you own your data and have it in full access. The attribution piece, the challenges that we face in attribution is the walled gardens. I mean, I'm not gonna tease you and say, oh yeah, I've broken down Facebook and Google's walls. It's not gonna happen. But what we have done is we've seen the ability to have steps in place to start to patchwork quilt a little bit our data together to see how we can kind of have a view and make some assumptions based on the data that we do have. So I'm going to take technology off because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I want to talk specifically about data. Competitive advantage comes at the kind of merging of first, second, and third-party data, and how you model that together, right? I don't think that this is new news. I mean, I hope it's not new news, because I think that everybody has been using data and have talking about data for quite some time. I think the newness that's coming out, at least in the brand world, is the idea of not just owning a DMP, but really leveraging it for what it is, right? But the trick, and my biggest piece from a brand perspective, is ownership. Data ownership is coming to light now because of a lot of transparency issues we find in the industry. As a brand, you know, as a company, data is your most valuable asset. It is hands down the most valuable asset you have because it has the ability to do so much from driving insights to driving sales to knowing your consumer. It is your most valuable asset. And so when it comes to ownership, you really need to think about what you do own out there. So I like to do that in the sense of thinking about how to aggregate it. And obviously, the DMP, or your data management platform, is part of that. We don't necessarily have a DMP today. It's something that's hopefully in our future pipeline. But we do leverage DMPs to do the strongest campaigns for us. So the first idea here is around data in. Your first-party data, right? So CRM, digital analytics, sales information. This should be your quick win, right? And this should be kind of your starting point to say, I know this data, right? Because otherwise, you have this big lumping of data, you don't necessarily know what to do with it. Start there. Start at your first party, right? If you have that and you have knowledge, that's the first thing you can own. Then your second-party data. So we partner, and I'll show you an example after this. We partner with many vendors on in large business partnerships that allow us to access data and allow us to use that data in a more collaborative approach. Third-party data, obviously the data that you can buy into, competitive data that helps support this. You're not going to be able to own all of this, but it is the access points with which you can start aggregating. And what I appreciate about DMPs is that a lot of vendors and a lot of partners will allow you to start infusing their data into your own DMP, or leveraging their DMP so you can start doing what you really need to do, which is unifying, right? So we have our audience, we talked about them, and now this is the trick to actually reaching them, and reaching them with meaning, is really building the right audience model for targeting. Because then what you can do is execute across your full ecosystem. Again, it's not a perfect model. We have walled gardens issues. We have data sharing issues. These are the things that keep me up at night. They're the things that I'm trying to continue to work on in the industry. But this simple way of thinking about just starting points of where you do have data and starting to unify what you do know will at least have a foundation for kind of the beginning stages of how do you reach them with meaning. And I'm going to show you an example of something we did in the United States, specifically around trigger models for cold and flu. And the idea is that we leveraged a second-party vendor, specifically for their data, but also for their media, and did predictive modeling. And so what we saw, and I'll let the video speak for itself, but what we saw was a 38% increase in sales and a 21% increase in ROI.
Pam, can you call my mom?
Flu season is the worst. If you're sick, you're home binge watching Netflix, feeling miserable. Mucinex's mission this flu season was to end the misery for everyone by becoming the first choice for people when flu symptoms hit. The biggest challenge facing Mucinex is that people associated the brand more with congestion than with cold and flu. So to take Mucinex to a new level, we had to win up against giants like NyQuil and Robitussin. We didn't have our competitors' budgets to blanket the nation throughout cold and flu season, so we focused on a regional, sniper-like approach. Our research showed that our target, the doers, won't take flu lying down. When they start to feel sick, they purchase flu meds for the entire season, and if we missed that window, we would lose them until the following year. But how could we be in just the right places at the exact time when people started to feel sick? Consumer research clearly pinpointed that doers start their flu journey with WebMD at the first sign of symptoms. They start researching, looking for solutions, so we use their symptom checker to create a huge innovation in data-driven marketing. In partnership with the client and our partners at WebMD, an algorithm was developed that enabled us to predict when cold and flu was about to hit geographical regions across the United States. When upticks of cold and flu symptom increased in specific regional areas, we immediately created locally relevant and creative Mucinex banners and videos and displayed them all over the web, but only in the areas where flu was about to hit. We made Mucinex appear to be the biggest brand at exactly the moments when it counted most. Based on this groundbreaking data-driven marketing approach, Mucinex's ROI, engagement, and market share grew to successfully make Mucinex the #1 player for cold and flu.
What I love about that example is at RB, we strive to take learnings and make them a reality across the globe, right? And we do that very quickly. It's kind of what I appreciate about the company. So once we had learnings on this particular trigger model and how this could activate, we then partnered with a more global partner, because WebMD is very centered in the States and in the UK. We partnered with a larger global vendor to now actually have trigger modeling around the world. And so it's been great for our cold and flu business. It was a massive opportunity, and again, a really good story behind how to use second-party data and leveraging the data that you can to then kind of execute across your ecosystem. So we know our consumer. We have fully decided on how to get data to target them effectively. Let's talk about content. Content, again, I said, is probably the toughest nut to crack here because it is something that is so personal and so important on the relevancy factor. You know, content is no longer a TVC, right? Content is not a banner ad, it's not Facebook posts, it's so much more than that. You know, consumers are engaging with 11.4 pieces of content before they make a purchase decision. And this isn't advertising content, this is a full content story. And it's so much more dependent on content now than they were 5 years ago. So when I think about content, I tend to get a little overwhelmed, mostly because I think there's a lot of confusion on who owns content, right? You know, before, it was very simple. Creative agencies own content, brand people own content. Now media is getting into the content game because it has to. And so I kind of, you know, I get asked all the time what I think about content, and I'm like, whoa, am I supposed to be evaluating a piece of creative? That's not my job, because that's not my expertise. But that's not what it's about. It's about the relevancy factor in the platforms. It's about understanding the media types to really figure out what content is going to break through. And so I try to break this into 5 key areas, and to make sure that you're really thinking about that consumer journey that we talked about, then marrying it to the types of content you're going to need, okay? So the first one, very simple concept to understand, advertising content, right? Everybody gets this concept. This is your TV ads, this is your OLV ads, this is what product brand messages you put out there. This is usually the one that's the easy win for people. This is where your creative agencies really excel. The second bit is around editorial content. This is really important because this is what a consumer is searching for. You know, if they're looking for something specifically within a search space, you need to make sure that you have the content ready that's going to provide them that information, or you've lost them. You know, more often than not, you'll get a search result, it'll jump to your website, and then they'll just jump off because it wasn't what they were looking for, it wasn't the answer that they needed. In addition, you know, we think about ad blocking. It's something that, you know, is really starting to come up in the US and the UK, and something that, you know, I think as technology gets stronger could be more prevalent in the global space. So native content, right? So what's your strategy in native? You know, it's more passive in the sense that you're not going to have blatant brand messages, but that's the point. You need to get in there and be able to sell them through native. So when this technology does start to come up, we're prepared. Organic content. I think I love this the most because this is really the opportunity for always on. These are the spaces where you're really talking to the consumer. This is the relationship building stage. However, in the brand world, it's also a piece of content that is massively expensive to have, you know, masses of, and also it is not necessarily a direct sell. And so if you think about it in terms of that, if you're thinking about this content with this media type has to give me X sales, it doesn't work like that. And so what we all have to realize is there's certain brands that are going to need organic stories, and there's certain brands that won't. But the ones that need it because it's the relationship building, right? So do you have the right content in place, but also do you have the right communities in place to keep the messaging continuously going? Bloggers and influencers. So I think YouTube has done an amazing job in the last couple of years of really establishing themselves in the influencer space. It's worked tremendously for our business. I think people love recommendations, and this is kind of the new wave media of recommendations, right? It's less about going to your friends and family and really being inspired by a public figure that's, you know, gotten a lot of traction as an expert. And retail. So retail is interesting because you know, 5 years ago, I mean, Amazon existed, but what Amazon is doing today just did not. And e-com, we cannot negate what e-com is doing, because what you need in Amazon is not the same type of content that you're going to need in Google, but they're both search platforms, right? So same role, but different types of content. So you can't expect that the editorial content that you're going to need coming out of, you know, thinking about your websites and your search queries is the same as the Amazon content that you're going to need when they're searching on Amazon. And so, like I said, if you break this down, if you break your consumer journey down, you make the priorities on the roll, then you kind of take this kind of thinking, you can start to more easily, I should say, break down what types of content you're going to need. Now, the big trick here is where to get it. Now, I'm a huge fan of all of our creative agencies. I think they do amazing jobs, but I also know that they come with amazing budgets. And so the trick is to ensure that they are partnering with other partners that can help make sure that our brands stay true to the brand, because the creative agency owns that world, that purpose, the vision. But there's more partners out there today that can help you actually do mass amounts of content. So like I said, bloggers, so YouTube and their influencers help in development of content all the time. We work with new partners like Vice, who are now kind of moving into the content space where they will do mass content always on based on their crowdsourcing. We've found a lot of success with that. Twitter, humorist, users, you know, leverage any ability to get really engaging content. And the thing that I really value most is similar to the insight reporting and the actual reporting, is you can throw something out on Facebook and you'll see a reaction. You're going to know if that made sense. And so it's kind of like trial and error. I mean, you don't want to do it to the point that you're going to mess up your relationships with your consumers, but you can get a lot of insights by putting out a piece of content, seeing what's actually going to happen. And then once you see what that works, you can then develop content similar to that. I'm going to show you an example. I absolutely love this. This is an example out of Australia, and it's so simple. I love simple things because it makes my life a little easier. And this was an example of Campbell's soup and how they use something as simple as search queries as a data point to develop personalized content.
Soup has been nourishing humanity for millennia. That's why Campbell's believes no matter what life throws at you,
Who's got a soup for that?
the trouble is we only ever think to cook it when it gets cold. And with 2016 marking Australia's warmest winter on record, sales of Campbell's soup had hit an all-time low. We needed to make a 20,000-year-old dish relevant in 2016. So we created Soup Tube, a pre-roll campaign with over 1,700 individual ads. Each one specifically tailored to the video you were searching for on YouTube. Excited for the new season of Orange is the New Black? You will be served this. If you're listening to single ladies, you'll see this. Trying to make sense of world politics? Can't let go of Let It Go? Looking for fail videos? Searching for carpool karaoke? Catching up on UFC highlights? Need cooking advice? New Star Wars trailer? We even created daily pre-rolls related to the world's trending topics, like Brexit, the Icelandic soccer team, and Pokemon Go.
It allows us to be really relevant, really topical, and really quick.
And I think it's a really interesting campaign just because of how targeted it is. And it really sets a benchmark for how brands and their agencies should consider communications moving forward.
This resulted in an average view rate of 92%, a total of 2.5 million impressions, a 24.7% lift in ad recall, and a 6.9% lift in brand awareness. And best of all, a 55.6% increase in sales of Campbell's Simply Soups. We didn't give Australians a reason to buy Campbell's soup, we gave them thousands, helping Campbell's soup become relevant almost 20,000 years later.
I'm gonna go get some soup.
I love that. All right, so we've talked about insights on driving to understand your consumer. We've talked about the data you need to reach them and the content that is relevant. Let's talk about your structure, and this to me again is the foundation. This is what I will put a lot of passion into talking about, because something that is very topical for us at RB right now. This is what you're up against in technology today. That's a lot. This is a lot. These are a lot of layers. This is what keeps me up at night, because I have to think about all of these different places. What's even more important to understand is all of these pieces of technology, all the things that you guys work on become part of a tech stack, part of a pipeline. And so that pipeline becomes really important to ensure that you have the right pipes and you have the most essential pipes, because this is where all of your data starts streaming through. And you can easily lose data through this whole journey. And so, we think about this model, and we think about who helps with our technology, and, it becomes really overwhelming as a brand to really understand this space. I'm going to share with you this report that actually the WFA shared with me recently. This is the inverted digital value chain. Now, this is a very aggressive type of statement, but I do think that there's some merit in what they're showing, which is within the technology and within the programmatic space, there is a potential to have 75% of your working dollars lost to both financial and exposure loss. That's not even talking about the data and the pipes. This is just before working dollars hit those pipes. And so what we have to think about is, how do I even get my head wrapped around the technology and make the right decisions so I can mitigate some of these issues? So I'm going to pause here for a little bit and talk in a broad base. Technology is complex. You guys know that. You're here for this. This is what this whole conference is about, is learning about technology and learning what's best for you. I am a big believer in knowledge of technology. If you are a brand, get your head wrapped around this. This is a space. Know what your agencies are using. Know how they integrate. Know what they do for you. Understand the strategic reasons you are using those pieces of technology. Because again, it's your pipes. It's where your data is flowing through, and as this data is your valuable asset, you don't want to lose sight of it. As tech partners, really help us in understanding these pieces of technology and understanding the strategic need for them. It's fine to want to sell something to us, but for me, I'd rather sit and have a strategy conversation than I would have a sales conversation. Because I think that once I understand the inner workings of the why, it really helps take shape on why that's going to be beneficial for my business. And our agencies, you guys are so important to us. You're our partners in all this. But that transparency bit came about. Part of that's you guys. So what we need is to be transparent. Help us here. You need to be partners in educating us. The education is the most important part of this. I think there's many questions that you can ask about technology, and I would encourage all of you to think about it. There's what's a tech stack? Do you want an open tech stack? Do you want a closed tech stack? Do you want, all these different? You want multiple DSPs? Is it a meta DSP approach? There's so many questions out there, and you have to understand first what is your business doing? I have a very clear understanding of what my business is doing because I've spent the last year really focusing on it. And I kept unwrapping it like a package, new packages in a package. And what I've realized at the end of it is because the data flow, because it's so tied to my assets, ownership of technology is massively important to me. Now, it's massively unrealistic to say everyone should own their tech stack. I get that. But definitely ask the right questions and understand what they're doing for you. And then how it serves the vendors, Just to break it down, because I think, again, this is a lot, and I showed you a massive chart. There's 3 core pieces of tech that you should at least start with in a knowledge perspective. First is your DSP, right? This is how you're buying the ads. This is your bids. This is your automation. Are you doing direct deals and going through it? Are you letting the system work for you? This is just fundamentally the platform with which you need to understand how the ads are bought. Then you got your ad server. This is core to data. This is your first entry into data. This is where you start to push ads through, but also evaluate how they've come back into the system. So you should definitely know your ad server. I am a big believer in having one and not many if you can potentially, which in the walled garden world doesn't work, but having at least one core one. And last, which I think is becoming much more prevalent, is verification. So fraud is not going away. It's going to get stronger, and that's a reality because technology is going to get stronger. But we can put some tools in place to help mitigate the loss factor that comes with it. So again, start here with your technology, then start to kind of unravel what you're doing. Make sure you know this as clients. It's massively important. And on that, I'm going to leave you with one more example. This is a great, what I think of as a great wrap-up of all the stuff that I've been talking about. Is an example from L'Oreal and Maybelline out of the Netherlands on how they used insights and data and programmatic and content to really shape a campaign that had great results.
We want to prove the full value of programmatic marketing. That meant looking at two KPIs: increase the cost efficiency and increase consumer engagement and relevancy.
For me, a programmatic campaign is a campaign that makes best use of technology. It captures the right type of data and uses that through the whole consumer journey.
So we got a lot of insight from the Google search reports. People are not just looking for trendy browse or browse I like, but they're really looking for problems that they're having with the browse. We really used this information to create our content based on these insights.
So what we did with this brow campaign is look at every stage of the funnel and see how we could activate programmatic for each stage.
Step 1 is about awareness. We used a commercial of Maybelline Brow to broadcast this to different audiences. We remarket the people who have completely viewed the video. We identified 3 different audiences to target: the functional user, the trend user, and the makeup user. Step 3 is the Brow Studio, the place where all the information on how-to videos, tips and tricks, and also how to select the right color. And based on the clicking behavior of the consumer, we identify which product fits her best. We want to show her that you can easily buy the same product online. She will probably see 1 or 2 banners with the message that you can buy directly with a discount online. They landed on the website and hopefully they are now going to buy the product. We started up this partnership with Vacom to exchange data so we can really learn from the online YouTube purchasing behavior of our consumers. If someone bought a product, we want to also show her how to use it properly. So we added info cards in the YouTube video. One led back to the Brow Studio with tips and tricks, and the second led back to the product page where people can leave a review once she's satisfied with her purchase.
So the great thing about Google and DoubleClick is they have a very integrated technology stack. The support is great as well, so they really help us to build the best campaigns. We should never be afraid to test and to change, because only in that way will you be able to get the best out of the technology.
The first results are very optimistic, so we score above all our benchmarks. This is the future of marketing, so just step into it, select the right partners and go.
So this was obviously a Google example, but I will say that Google is not the end-all be-all for tech stack, so you have to be exploratory in what your decision-making will be. It's not our tech stack, just FYI, but it was a great example and I felt really relevant to the discussion. So that is it. Questions, if they have time. I don't know if I went over.
Well, I must admit, a fantastic presentation there, Andrea. We're going to open the floor for just 2 questions because we do have a little paucity of time. But quick questions. Yes, sir. Can we have a mic passed on to the gentleman there? And we'll take one more question as well.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Vishal from Chail Worldwide. Andrea, interesting presentation. One thing which caught my attention was when you mentioned you guys have partnered with Vice, right, for content? Mm-hmm. Now, Vice is known as a risque content creator worldwide, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, have you guys, what have you guys done to mitigate risks, sure, which comes with potential issues or controversies? Or will you guys just take that in your stride and move on? What's your strategy for that?
Yeah, we never take anything in stride. We're more conservative than that. No, so Vice, I use the example of Vice. They have actually an arm called Virtue. And what they started to create is a crowdsourcing of content. But the crowds that they source out to are actually get a brief, just like a creative brief. So we work with our creative agencies, develop the brief. They understand the brief footprint. They understand the, the do's and the don'ts. And then we can get content back in mass from around the world that's relevant to the brands. Now, don't get me wrong. This does not work across all our brands, right? Durex is a big one that we use this for because it's an edgier, more millennial brand. This wouldn't necessarily be a Lysol solution. This was just an example of kind of vendors that you can go to for that, if that answers your question.
We'll take that as one last question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Samprata from Abbott. And I just wanted to go back to a conversation that keeps me up at night. You showed us that very fabulous slide with lots of data partners, DSPs, technology players coming in. And with organizations such as ours, which are spread across large geographies and markets, the problem of the walled garden is then sort of fortified by the problem of what technology works in what market. Mm-hmm. So when you really start to own data, it becomes trickier with every execution on how do you build that single solution for your organization to be leveraged across each country very quickly.
Yes.
So what are you doing? Are you doing anything to that effect to get everything centered and sort of accumulated?
Yes, yes. I mean, it is something that is massively complex, and it is definitely a stop blocker for a lot of data. What we are doing, and this is kind of trying to get all of the ownership of our data as much as we potentially can. I am very pragmatic in knowing that that's not going to be fully possible, but I have worked with Facebook and Google in a lot of the discussions to say, okay, where can we access our data? And when we have the DMP, can we have data in, or do we need to be kind of leveraging your DMP at that time? And how do they integrate, right? Because then that becomes a technology integration discussion. The good news is that these guys are really open to conversation, and they're open to trying to find solutions. They understand that they're the blockade of a lot of the things brands want to do and companies want to do. That doesn't mean they're going to change, but they are open to try to figure out solutions. The good news for us, which I know it's bad news for them, but the good news for us is they keep getting pushed by the industry. So I sit within the executive committee on the WFA, and this is a massive topic that we talk about a lot. And as much as us as marketers can push on them and change the the game, that'll push on them. I mean, look at Facebook and the viewability story. There's been massive shifts in their viewability story and what they're trying to do. Will that change overnight? Probably not, but there are ways that you can kind of, and this is what I refer to as the patchwork quilt of pulling it all together. But it is something that definitely keeps me up at night. So, good.
All right, then. Thank you once again, Andrea.
Guys.
Let's have a round of cheer to thank Andrea as well. Thank you very much.